Today is Wednesday, November 18th, 2015. I am Susan Meehan, and I'm talking today with Tita Eberly in the recording studio at the Cumberland County Historical Society. Tita is currently a member of the Historical Society's Board of Directors, has served in that capacity in the past, has been a longtime volunteer here, and as well as running the Society's gift shop. Tita, how did you come to be in Cumberland County?
Well, it's a bit of a different way than probably most of the people that you interview. I was born in Illinois. My mother was a Texan, and she married a Texan, but he had moved to Illinois in the late 30s and early 40s when there was oil discovered in southern Illinois. And so when she married, she moved to Illinois, and I was born in 1941. And about 18 months later, my mother decided that she was not happy in the marriage, and she said goodbye. And I never saw my father. I never talked to him. I never knew him. But we moved back to San Antonio, where she lived and her parents lived. And my mother took a job in the air defense, something or other, and so she was in San Antonio in the early 40s during the war, and met Dr. Newton Hirschner, who adopted me in probably when I was about 5. And I remember very vividly driving up to Carlisle to the courthouse, where they were changing my last name from Hickey to Hirschner. And and on the way back, I remember vividly saying, well, if you could change my last name, why didn't you change my first name from Patricia to Tita, which was a family nickname, which has stuck with me throughout my life. So that's how I got to Cumberland County.
So now Dr. Hirschner was a resident of Cumberland County?
He grew up in Mechanicsburg, and his father was a doctor, an old-fashioned family doctor. And he had grown up in the house that he was born in, and that's where we ended up, maybe not right at first, but soon after my grandfather died, and we moved into the family house.
And is that house on the Main Street?
Yes, it's on Main Street, and we lived in it until probably 1960, or my parents lived there in 1967 or 68, and then they sold it.
So your childhood memories really are very much in
Yes.
town.
Oh,
in
very much.
Mechanicsburg.
Yes.
And
yes.
Is there anything that comes to mind offhand about?
Well, it was in the late 40s, early 50s, and as a child, I thought it was magical. It was a small town. We knew everybody in every house, certainly within 2 or 3 blocks. Initially, I lived in the first block of West Main Street. I lived on the side of the street that there was a movie theater. There was a Five and Dime. Just right across a little street, there was a hardware store and a drug store. And we were able to just, as 5, 6, 7-year-old, just spend our time on the street. Knew all the merchants, and everybody looked out for everybody. The police all knew you. They helped you across Main Street if you needed to go across Main Street. I went to the movies almost every week, 3 times a week, because the movies changed every 2 days, and it cost 16 cents to get in the movie, and 26 cents for a bag of popcorn.
And were these the like canned cowboy movies?
Oh,
or
yes, 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 yes.
Um, then when you were in the street in this group of children, were they neighborhood children? Did you have brothers and sisters then later that
I
you
didn't. Well, I didn't have any brothers and sisters until till I was 6, and then a sister came along, and then 2 years later a brother, and years later another sister. So I had my hands full.
You were the big
Yes,
sister.
yes,
For
I was
sure.
the big sister, and my friends all remember me always having somebody in my hand or pushing a baby carriage or whatever after school.
And was your father then practicing medicine?
Yes. He was the first, I think the first intern or resident at Harrisburg Hospital in the obstetric department. So that was an early thing going on at the Harrisburg Hospital.
Well, then, because of the nature of his business, you would have some memory or association with Seidel at all?
Oh, yes. My grandfather was on the first board, and my father then took his place. And when we moved into their home further about 2 blocks away, my grandfather had an office in the house. And so it was a 3-story brick house, typical downtown Mechanicsburg. And the main door was the house door, and then there was a little door where a window used to be into the office. And that's where my dad had his office. And for a while he had an office in Harrisburg also. He had both of those.
He saw patients in that office then too?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But so when was Seidel built then?
During
your lifetime?
I think it was probably, I should know, either in the late 20s. I think it was late 20s, early 30s, and it was part of the original building. Was part of Irving College, so it was down at that end of town. And as I said, my grandfather was on the board, my father-in-law was on the board, my father was on the board, and when my father-in-law, I guess my father had resigned before I went on the board. I know I was the first woman, and I took my father-in-law's place on the board.
Were you still serving on the board then when Seidel
Yes, when Seidel
made those major decisions?
Yes, when Seidel was absorbed by Harrisburg Hospital, I was still on the board.
That was a
But
big
went through
change
lots
for
of changes even in that time, because they tore down the original old building, which had been part of the Irving College, and put up a new fancy building. And was part of the fundraising for that sort of thing.
Well, I know I've talked to people who were born in Seidel.
Mm-hmm.
And
My husband was born in Seidel. Yeah.
Well, then, was your grandmother a Irving girl?
Yes, she was. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she graduated in, I think, 06. And she was a music major. And I gather that she played, we used to have two movie theaters downtown. And at some point or other, she played the piano for the...
Silent movies?
Yes.
So she could play without music then?
I guess,
by ear
yeah,
and just...
yeah. I never heard her play, so she didn't have a piano. We had a piano later in my life, but don't remember that.
Well, you have had a unique opportunity then to know all the players in Mechanicsburg over the time.
Well, back from those days, yes. Yeah.
Is there any one of note that you would want to
You mean
talk
early
about?
on?
Mhm.
Early on?
And someone else might not remember that person, but you do.
Well, let me think. Well, we lived, before we moved into my grandparents' home, we lived in a house owned by Mary Thomas Brocker, and her father was, I can't remember his first name, but he was very involved in lots of things culturally in Mechanicsburg, and he published a newspaper, and he published lots of things, and he was very involved in the Granger's picnic things, and so I would hear about these things. And Mary later on, when I was living in her house on the first floor with the family before we moved to my grandparents' home, she was involved with the Chamber of Commerce. So we always knew what was going on, and we always, were included in all kinds of things in the community.
So when you were growing up, it was more contained, and there was not the sprawl to Mechanicsburg that happened.
Yeah.
Was that during the 70s that?
I would guess.
And did you have a church association that you're?
I had a couple. I grew up as an Episcopalian, and then when we moved to my grandparents' house, behind our house, the home that the Presbyterian minister and his family lived, and they had a daughter a year older than me and a daughter a year younger than me, and then one a few years younger. And they lived right across from the original school building where we went to elementary school from 1st to 4th, and then I guess from 7th to 12th. So everybody went there at those times, and then we went to 5th and 6th grade down in other buildings, depending on where you lived. There were a couple of other buildings. So we had the school area was part of our playground because we could roller skate, and there was a hill, and there were things to skate around, and parking lots to skate in and crawl around in, and alleys to play in, and so kids were always in the alleys and playing around and visiting friends.
And so because of the girls, then you were Presbyterian for a while?
Yes, and I never really joined the church,
Mm-hmm.
but I would go to everything. Wednesday night, whatever they had,
Mm-hmm.
and so.
But as you were growing up, most people did have a church association, and
Yes,
that was
yes,
a big
they did.
part of your daily life.
And an interesting thing, and I'm not sure how many people you're talking to from Mechanicsburg, but there was a charming Catholic church, and it was very, very, very small. In my class in high school, I think there were only 2 Catholics graduating in our class, and I remember going to a neighbor's neighbor who was doing whatever girls do when they're 6 or 7, and they get all dressed up in a white
First Communion.
First Communion. I was so jealous. I was ready to become a Catholic. That looked more fun. So that was a long time ago, and it was not. I guess it wasn't until maybe I was practically out of high school. I can't remember when that little church was torn down, but the Catholic community did not grow in Mechanicsburg probably until after the war, well after the war, because that's when we had a lot of influx of people that were coming to work at the naval depot, and there were small housing developments coming up, and that was not the case when I was first there. I guess that might have been, but I wasn't aware of it. It probably had just barely started.
So then the children of those new people, were they incorporated into the Mechanicsburg schools, or they didn't?
Yes.
So
As a matter of fact, one of the housing developments that was developed probably during or soon after the war was where the current senior high school is in Mechanicsburg. That was a little housing development.
So were you in school with Dan Drawbaugh then? Or
Oh, yes. I went to Dan Drawbaugh's 7-year-old birthday,
wow.
and I loved it. I was so impressed. His mother had used food coloring, and the applesauce was red, and the mashed potatoes were green, and I thought that was absolutely brilliant. I always have loved food. And we played drop the clothespin, those round clothespins with into a glass milk bottle. That was one of the games that I won.
All
I mean,
right.
this is a very vivid memory. And his father drove my grandfather's car when he was quite elderly and would take him to, I'm sure, to visit patients out in the country and that sort of thing.
That's a close community then.
Mm-hmm.
How about any special teachers in the schools? Anybody that stands out? Or
Well, I think we all loved an English teacher when we were in 10th and 11th grade. He was very creative and charming, and was an interesting scenario, and I perhaps shouldn't be talking about this, but it ended up, unbeknownst to us, he was gay, and he was eventually dismissed. Now, I guess there were probably no, just was not acceptable at all, and yet he was very influential to a lot of us. And I know
he reached you, the
yes,
students.
and I know that once he, some point or other, he taught in the Dillsburg system, and probably after he left Mechanicsburg at some point. And I know he was very influential with Jay Wiley, an attorney in Dillsburg. I don't think I have the first name right, but I know that he went to college because of this particular man.
Well, that's the best
It's
for teaching.
Yeah.
Did you?
So we knew we didn't know if we knew any gays. We didn't know any Catholics hardly. We knew no Jewish people. We had maybe one or two blacks in the whole system. So most of us didn't have any prejudices because we didn't know anything about that sort of thing, which I find, fascinating right now.
Was it a nice way to grow up?
Yes, it was magical.
Yes. So then, did you leave the area and go to college? Or?
Yeah, I went to Carnegie Tech, showing my age, and they had a girls' school that's we had a Carnegie Tech degree when we graduated, but it focused on other things, and I was a clothing and textile major, but because of being sort of an engineering school, we had organic chemistry, because some of the girls went on to work like at DuPont and they were working with textiles, but so it was a pretty broad education. And while I was there, I had an internship at Horns, a retail store, a general store, not a general store, a department store. And then I went. Then when I went away for the summer to Europe with sorority sisters. We had a great time, and then came back, and I decided to go down to Texas to visit my grandparents and see my cousins and that sort of thing before I looked for a job. But I did have in mind looking for a job down there. So I first visited a great aunt, and ended up in Houston, and ended up getting a job in Houston with
Not Neiman Marcus.
Neiman Marcus. Yeah, what? My mind is blank. Neiman Marcus, and about a year later was transferred up to the Dallas store. So I worked there for 2 or 3 years, and then ended up marrying the boy across the street in Mechanicsburg. I never ever thought I was going to be coming back to Mechanicsburg, but got to know him on my trip to Europe, and he was in the service, and here's this guy across the street that you're buddies with, and you're all sort of in the same gang and that kind of thing. But anyway, I got his address from his mother, and wrote him a letter and said we were going to be on a Rhine cruise and getting off at Rudesheim at such and such a day. Is there any chance he could we could have lunch together or dinner together. Well, it ended up I was able to stay with the tour group, but he would take me to lunches and dinners every single night, and I realized what a wonderful traveler he was and how much he liked history. And anyway, the rest is history. So yeah,
Had to leave the country to figure it out.
Right.
Very interesting. And you want to give his name just
Oh,
to.
I married I.S. Eberly from across the street. And he was at my 7th year birthday party, and in my baby book it says something about him, that these people were there. And when I reminded my mother of that after we got married, she said, "Oh, I remember that birthday party. Never again did we ever have boys. They just raced around like chickens with their head cut off."
But then you had really been in school with him.
Yeah.
That common background goes
And
a long way.
his family had been close with my grandparents, and he has an aunt that he called her Aunt Miriam, and we called her Aunt Midge. So there was that close tie too.
Well, everyone must have been thrilled.
Well, I think so.
I bet it was wedding was the event of the
No,
season.
we just had a very small, tiny wedding. Yeah.
Because that's what you wanted.
Yeah.
So then when you came back, you left Dallas, and then once you were married, you stayed in Mechanicsburg.
Right.
And then entered the retail business here, or not
No,
right away?
no, I didn't. No, we ended up having a family soon, and we lived on the 3rd floor of my in-laws' house. And we had four rooms and a bathroom, and I guess the family tradition was that when you got married, that happened, and then you moved to the 2nd floor, and then you moved to the 3rd floor. Well, I was certainly hoping that did not follow suit, and we finally moved to another house on Main Street, half a block away from where we both lived. And so we never went very far in life. And I.S. could still walk to work at the lumber yard.
But when you were married, he had already entered actively into the business.
Yeah.
So you just became the next.
And he sort of was in the business he grew up playing in the coal yard and things like that.
So then, were you with the children until a certain time, and then you decided you were going to?
Well, I was with the children basically all the time, except my husband encouraged me to. He was not a big joiner, and I was encouraged to be the family volunteer, which I did all the time. So it was early on that I was doing things, and I forget. I would guess I probably went on the Seidel board in the early 70s, and had been doing volunteer things, and was part of the Mechanicsburg Museum Association's original board, and also was very involved in things in downtown Mechanicsburg, and he ran for borough council, and was the first woman there. So I was always busy doing things with the auxiliary, with the museum.
And there's a women's club too, or
I never joined the women's club, and I think it was because I just all of a sudden was
things.
busy doing other things and doing things with the kids. And I guess it was sometime in the 70s that I joined the Junior League of Harrisburg too. And so I was busy with that, and found that very rewarding. And
I don't want to get ahead of the horse. How long were you on the borough council then? Did you have to run for re-election?
yeah, I ran
multiple times?
3 times, so I was 12 years.
Wow, that's pretty long.
Yes. And it was a good old boy situation
I'll bet.
at that point, very much. Yes. It was a challenge.
But you felt that was time well spent. That you-
Well, it was very time well spent. I felt that when I first was on the council, there were a couple of gentlemen that were friends of mine, and it was very good. We had a good working relationship, but they moved and things got, and you sort of do what you can do. And
Well, this would have been during the late 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
And it was a period of a lot of change, I would
yes,
think. So
yes, yeah.
Interesting times.
And sometime in the midst of that, I bought an old-fashioned dry goods store, or IS bought the old-fashioned dry goods store, called Biddle's, which any people from Mechanicsburg always remember. And I still am stopped on the street and said, "Oh, we miss Biddle's so much." Well, it was one of those things that
Now, where is Biddle's now? in relation to the,
Biddle's
like, the building?
is across the street from a church. It's on the east Main Street. It's next to what's a gallery
Okay.
on the north side of the street. And in it is a beauty shop. And it must have been quite a thing from the photographs that are in the Historical Society's collection. It was a department store, and I think you entered in the front of the largest part of the building, and I think there were big stairs up to the second floor. And I remember my uncle talking about Santa Claus coming to either the second floor or the third floor, and it was probably the largest department store in town, and it was Biddle's, and it was established in, I think, in 1860, also the same year that the lumberyard was established. And I think there's information in the Historical Society about that. But meanwhile, it was the late 70s, and it was times when other department stores nationwide were closing, and Walmart was coming in, and Kmart, and I would buy a half a dozen tea towels at a certain price, and I would look in maybe Walmart hadn't come, but Kmart was definitely there, and the Sunday newspapers would have the very same tea towel at lower price than what I bought it. And so, it was becoming a time that there was very hard to make money in a small, unless you were really a specialty shop or something like that. And we sort of had a reputation of being not far from a specialty shop, and it was just very difficult. So once I couldn't borrow one more $1,000 from my husband to get through the next month, it was time to just close the doors. So that was very sad, and I missed all the people and doing things, and that sort of thing. But
So that was good retail training, though.
oh, it was. And we also had something else against us. 2 of the years, one side of Main Street, the west side of Main Street, was dug down 18 inches for a whole year to rebuild the street. And so then the next year, the other side, the east one year, and so from the square, it didn't matter where, it really affected the businesses downtown. And so I do think that was part of it, but it was the kind of store that was not going to really make it. And I had other ideas, but it was just beyond that. So it was a learning experience.
Well, then, when did you begin your association with the State Museum gift shop? And did you begin that, or what's the story there?
Well, they had a store. They had a store, and there was a woman from Carlisle, not hadn't lived here long, but she was moving, and so she retired from the State Museum, and it was probably a couple of years after, probably early 80s. And my friend Linda Humes, who's been on the board here at the Historical Society for a number of years, she worked at the State Museum, and we were having coffee one morning, and she said, "Oh," I said, "What's new at the State Museum?" And she said, "Oh, our manager for the gift shop has resigned, and they're interviewing." And I said, "Oh, I would love that." It was after, I guess my kids were, my youngest was still in school, but 6th or 7th grade or something. And so anyway, I did, and I really enjoyed that. And that was about, I guess I did that for about 6 or 7 or 8 years. And we belonged to the State Museum belonged to an organization called Museum Store Association. It was nationwide, with members like from the Metropolitan, the Guggenheim, and Philadelphia Museum of Art, right down to zoos were part of it. Small historical societies are part of it, and that was really a wonderful thing. And it made me think, I wish I'd known that retailing was something way back when. So that's how I ended up here in the gift shop.
So were you asked to come here, or
I was on the board.
Okay,
I was on
and
the
you
board.
knew the
Yeah.
need and
Yeah.
the development
And
aspects.
they had a very, very small. It was all volunteers. I mean, I was a volunteer too.
But look what it grew into.
Well, and Kim was here, the current manager of the.
Oh, she was. I didn't
Yeah,
know that.
well, she was not in that capacity, but then
Yeah, I didn't know that.
she sort of moved into it when they were starting the construction or the work on the building next door.
Well, you've had a very varied career, from politician to
Well,
gift shop owner.
local politician was not much of a career, but it was a learning experience.
Well, most people don't do that. So, did your training at Carnegie prepare you in any way for the gift shop thing, like for quality of materials and things like that?
In a way, but in a very, very small way. I think I probably learned more at Neiman Marcus, and certainly working at the State Museum was helpful when coming here, because I already had contacts and knew people, and so that was
Right.
yeah.
So now your children, are any of your children in Mechanicsburg, or have
No,
they?
no, they all went off to college, and they all. My oldest went to Drexel, and she's always been in retailing, and it wasn't whatever her major was. It might have been marketing or merchandising or something, but she was always involved in retailing, and she went from there to Urban Outfitters, was a brand new company then, and she was there for 6 years, and she's worked at American Eagle, she's worked at Talbot's, she's worked at many places, and she is currently a vice president at LL Bean, and that's very recent, so sort of interesting. She will be 50 next year, and their average age is 51. So I think she's in a good place, and she loves it. My middle daughter was an anthropology English major, I think, and she's ended up in New York City, in Manhattan, in marketing, but it's internet marketing with a health company called Healthline, and she's also a vice president there. And they're based in California, and she's doing well. And my youngest is an environmental biologist, and she went to school in New Mexico and got her master's in New Hampshire at a school called Antioch, it's not really. I think it used to be affiliated with the Antioch in Ohio, but I'm not sure it is. But it's a graduate school, and that was in biology. And then she worked at the wetlands in Stone Harbor, New Jersey, and still lives down in that area, and married a professor of biology at Stockton University. So they have been involved in research and things like that with that university.
This is an entirely different life pattern for this generation than for yours.
Yes.
And yet you were more mobile in coming from Illinois and Texas to Pennsylvania.
Yeah. But they always they always traveled a lot as kids and went to camps all over the country and did things like that. So they've I think those kind of exposures and not really being interested in the lumberyard made them always look elsewhere for what they were going, where their spirits led them.
So now, when you look at Mechanicsburg now and Cumberland County, it seems to me from what you've been saying that Mechanicsburg is less discreet in its neighborhood, and do you see a big conglomerate kind of metro area kind of thing, or how do you feel in?
Well, it's hard for a town like Mechanicsburg to maintain their small town atmosphere when they're surrounded by major developments, and it really hit home how maybe Mechanicsburg was perceived when my youngest moved from not nursery school, from a primary school into 7th or 8th grade or whatever it was at that point, when all the schools came together. And her birthday's December 26th, and so she was having a birthday party, and she invited children from her friends that she'd made at school, new friends, in December to come to her house for a sleepover, and some of them weren't allowed to come because she lived on Main Street. And I thought, oh my goodness, it's worse than I thought it was. But there's been a real change in the socioeconomic situation between town and neighborhoods, which I'm sure is evident also in areas like Cumberland Valley and things like that.
Yes, I think other areas of the county. The same. Do you remember the train at all as a child?
The train? Oh yes, yeah. When we first moved there, we lived on the north side of Main Street, so the train was in our alley, and I remember putting pennies on the tracks and having them squished and that sort of thing. I also remember vividly that they were putting in the sewer system for the first time. When we first moved there, I was probably 5 or 6. So they were digging up all of the alleys, and it was a mess, but it was fun to play in.
So up until that time, there was just outhouses.
Right. Yeah. And I don't think I ever rode on the train to Harrisburg. I remember lots of riding on the bus to go to Harrisburg, and then at an age I was allowed to go on the bus by myself. And
so and why would you go to Harrisburg? To the movies?
To movies, and just for a Saturday, and shop. When we wore white gloves, especially when you went with your mother and your grandmother.
Right. That's all.
And had lunch at a tea room at Pomeroy's.
I think that's quite a famous tea room.
Yeah.
That was a very interesting time to grow up in that area. How about like any memories of proms or roller skating, or ice cream must have been rake straws?
Well, ice cream was rake straws, yeah. And I remember when the drugstore I spoke of was called Deals, and it was like a half a block from where the high school was. So all of the football players and the cheerleaders, just everybody in the band came to deals for a Coke after school, and I lived like a half a block from that. And so I knew all like when I was in 5th and 6th grade, I knew all the head majorettes, I knew all the football players from being over there. And it was just wonderful.
Is that the same drugstore that was used in the movie?
No. It was a more contemporary drugstore. It was where Weber's Hardware was part of where Weber's Hardware was. There was a hardware store and this drugstore in one building. So it was real long and narrow, with a pharmacy and.
Well, how about proms? Were they held at the school?
No, they were held at the Hershey Hotel, which was very glamorous.
Well, I think.
Yes, yeah.
So, and the guys could drive over there. That was not a problem.
Well, if you were dating a senior, they could, or dating or
right.
invited by a senior, they could drive. So I don't ever remember my parents taking us. So.
Well, I know. Were the students involved in decorating and so on then, or did the
Not really.
hotel
It was
do
just. It was really.
place?
It was just a place. We would decorate the gym for parties.
Sock hops.
And then we also would have. There were certain things we had at the American Legion, and we would decorate that. There were little social clubs. Not really a sorority, but that kind of thing. And so they would have things. Lots of crepe paper.
But you had to take it down then too. Trying to think of like the nursery, the landscaping business and those things coming in. Were they always there?
My best friend from 1st grade still had a flower shop, and it was up on Coover Street, and some of my favorite memories were prom nights when we were like in 5th, 6th, 7th grade, because we would go up and we would hand out the corsages to the football players, and so we got to see them all dressed up, and that was really fun. But there was no landscaping. I mean, you did your own lawn and that sort of thing. I don't even think there was such a thing at that point.
But I was thinking, when did Country Market come in then? Was that in the 60s or that started out? Hess, was it Bill Hess or?
Yeah. I think a Hess was involved, and it's out on Hess property. I didn't think it was that early, but maybe it was. And of course, that would have been about the time I was in college, and I would not have paid attention to anything like that.
How about parades? Any memories of anything
Oh,
special happened in parades?
Well, we always had parades up to, there was a parade every home football game from the high school up Main Street to the football stadium. And the football team would be on an Eberly lumber truck, a flat truck. And we would walk behind, or the cheerleaders would walk behind, and the band would be in front. So that was very small town. And then, the Halloween parade.
And the Jubilee days.
Oh, yes.
Were they always there, or was that late?
They started in the late 20s. And I think there was only 1 or 2 years during the war that there wasn't a Jubilee Day. And since I lived on Main Street, I was, part of that forever. I remember when we first moved up to my grandparents' house, at that point, the agriculture animals were in front of our house. And here was my mother, who's from San Antonio, Texas, and, never had anything to do with farms or anything. She was just appalled, but I loved it.
Yeah, I guess.
And kids would go down, just probably like they do today. They literally went downtown for the whole day. You just sort of hung out.
But the nature of what was sold or whatever at Jubilee's.
It
days
was
must have
more
changed.
local commercial things, not, they
Like
did.
sidewalk sales or something.
Well, and it was like car dealerships would have, great, like quarter of a block to show their new cars. It was not honky tonk with vendors coming in with things.
Well, we have gone an hour,
Okay.
so we can continue or we can stop.
Well, I
You
think
have-
we've talked about a lot.
you
Is there
have-
anything especially that you think we've?
I think I pulled from what you said, but if you have anything that you'd like to add, that this is a chance to put things on record that might just be memories that you have, and I don't know what they are.
Yeah. Well, it was just a magical time.
How about Irving? Anything that you can remember from your grandmother talking
Well,
about
see,
it?
it closed in '29, and so I know she used to go to. There was Irving College women, girls,
Yeah, alumni
ladies,
or something.
alumni, and I think they met at Allenbury for years because Mrs. Hines was. I think she was in one of the last classes, but I think it was a special time to grow up then too. And the railroad was a big part of life.
Yes. Well, we might as well close it for now, and then
Okay.
if you think of other things, as I wish I'd had told Bob, those
Yeah.
sort of things, let me know, and we can have another go.
Okay.
Or maybe there's someone, did Linda Humes grow up in Mechanicsburg
Yeah, Linda
too?
would be a good one to talk to
But
because she
I
goes
wonder
back.
if they're going to be valid to have you together, triggering each other's memories.
Well, she was East Main Street and I was West
Oh,
Main Street,
there you go.
and we were for 4 years apart. I mean, when I was
Separate worlds.
yeah. I mean, she was like she was the best dressed in her class. She was
I
the
can believe that.
She was valedictorian. I mean, she was up on a pedestal. When you're in 6th and 7th grade, that
Yeah. And you were aware of it
Yeah,
because of your
yeah,
contacts in
yeah,
the other places.
yeah.
Well, it sounds very charming. Nice
was.
that you
yeah.
can put some of that on the record to go with the pictures, and that gives us a good record.